What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the 415ers podcast, coming at you twice a week on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Please download, rate, subscribe specifically on the Odyssey app. Of course, wherever you download your podcast from is much appreciated. We got some updates finally, Marc, from OTAs. I know as we're recording on Monday, those listening on Tuesday, the first day will officially be underway. But we are in the thick of the summer offseason workout program for the 49ers officially. We got some loose ends and some miscellaneous stuff that's kind of cool to clean up. And of course, we'll start with the quarterback position. But Marc, Grandi, Evan Giddings with you as always. Before we get to that, Marc, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Evan. Yeah, looking forward to seeing some guys out there not in pads, and you won't see anyone hit anyone else this week. But it's just excited to see a bunch of guys, big name stars out there getting ready for the season. OTAs is always a fun time of the year. Now it is optional at this stage. You won't see Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa never comes to OTAs. Doesn't mean he's not working out. He is always working out. You won't see Nick Bosa, but you'll see a lot of really, really good players down there in Santa Clara. So I'm looking forward to this week. We'll hear from Kyle Shanahan, from other members of the team this week. We'll talk about that in our next episode. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm doing well. How are you today, Evan?
I'm good. Look, I cannot complain. It is not officially, of course, nearing football season, but it tends to feel that way as we get
Yeah.
so close. And obviously, there's still a lot to discuss with the 49ers. There's always, of course, stuff that's interesting looking around the league, which, of course, we'll break down more so from an NFC West perspective, but we'll get into everything NFL throughout this summer. But with the 49ers, the place that, of course, we got to start, Marc, is with Trey Lance, because Matt Barrows of The Athletic wrote about him late last week, and the fact that, not only, of course, all eyes are on him, but it does appear like he has, taken that and the expectations that are going to be sort of thrust upon him, whether he likes it or not. And he's taken it. He's worked on his throwing motion. We talked about, throughout the offseason, Jeff Christensen, went down and worked with Trey Lance, and according to Barrows, he seems to be remarkably improved, or at least according to Christensen. And so now we're going to officially get to see that in OTAs and on. But I'll throw it to you first. What did you kind of make about Lance's mechanics being substantially improved, so to speak?
Well, that's the word, substantial. And if you're watching along on YouTube, you can see there on the bottom that was the word that Matt Barrows used. That was the word that Christensen, his quarterback coach, used. His private quarterback coach used. And they said that Lance's issues with his throwing motion initially were, quote, substantial. Christensen said it usually takes him a day to diagnose what's wrong with the quarterback's delivery. But with Lance, Barrows writes, it took 4 days. But once he figured out the root cause, there was steady progress. So certainly it seems good news that the 49ers, or Trey Lance and the 49ers, should have a quarterback here that has a better delivery of the football. That certainly sounds promising. But to hear that your private coach, called issues with your delivery substantial, and the fact that it took 4 days to diagnose all of those issues and figure out exactly what needs to be cleaned up, that's a little troublesome for me. And I mean, I guess you can understand it. Again, we've spent so much time talking about how inexperienced this kid Trey Lance is. But that word, substantial issues with his throwing motion, Evan, that scares me. I'm not quite sure how to react to that.
No, and unfortunately, whether it's fair or foul, it kind of aligns with the narrative that he had not been properly developed. And I know Kyle Shanahan has been a quarterback whisperer, and he has gotten consistent production from every single one of his starting quarterbacks. The knock on him throughout his entire career really has been that he hasn't been able to groom or draft and develop a quarterback. Kirk Cousins is probably the best example of that. But each and every guy that he's had has primarily been already, completed. And Trey Lance was supposed to be the first here, specifically in San Francisco, that he was able to groom. And the fact that after 2 seasons, granted one of which was cut short, but after 2 seasons of having this guy going through an entire offseason program, and of course, in addition to the draft process in which you have a chance to go see this guy or at least look at him on tape, have a chance to go out to his combine, scouting day, all the rest, and you didn't identify these things that Jeff Christensen did within 4 days, that's a bit of a red flag, Mark. And look, I know that all of this is also upon Trey Lance to be able to make some, internal adjustments and clearly, by the 55 roughly completion percentage that he had through those 4 games, even if one of which is a monsoon, should raise some eyebrows. It is kind of along the lines of what we've been thinking. Like Christensen is saying basically there was a lot of work that needed to be done with this kid. We felt like we got it done. And yeah, but how come the 49ers couldn't have done that for the last 2+ seasons?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I think this feels like something to me that happened as a result of his relative lack of experience. And yeah, the 49ers had him basically healthy for his entire rookie year. Although his first spot start for Jimmy Garoppolo, he came in and injured his hand, and that certainly affects your throwing motion. And then of course we know what happened this most recent season when he broke his ankle. Um, but I think this is something where he was never the most polished quarterback. Like in that draft class, you were selecting one of the rawer guys. And it's just the case when, first of all, you draft a guy that didn't play for, multiple. I mean, he had a couple of years as a starter at North Dakota State, but it's not like he was a 3-year starter at a Division One FBS level. He's playing at the FCS level, which again, there's certainly good competition there. But he came into the NFL with probably an underdeveloped throwing motion, not complete. He didn't come in, as a Trevor Lawrence who, by all accounts looks already like a polished NFL quarterback, and he did when he was at Clemson. And then you just have kind of his haphazard career at the NFL up to this point. Certainly, I'm sure that the throwing mechanics, the issues with those mechanics weren't something the 49ers didn't notice. It's just been such a strange trip that they probably haven't been able to really nail it down. But it's good that it's happening now. The other thing that stood out to me from Matt Barrows' piece on The Athletic, again, talking about Christensen, Trey Lance's private quarterback coach, he said, Christensen did, that Lance reminds him of his most well-known client, Patrick Mahomes, in terms of his competitiveness and demeanor. Interesting there from his quarterback coach, Christensen, that he thinks that of Trey Lance. My only thought at this point is, again, with OTAs coming up, will we see an improved throwing delivery? And will he even get a chance? Because it almost seems like that might not happen for the 49ers this year. But I thought that this was a really eye-opening piece of information that Matt Barrows delivered on The Athletic from, Trey Lance's private coach, Christensen, and he was obviously complimentary of his guy. Of course, he's not going to, say anything bad about a guy that he works with that is his client. But the fact that he was willing to compare him at all in any shape or form that the Patrick Mahomes also stood out to me.
Well, Trey Lance also worked out with Patrick Mahomes, and he had
They
him
did
literally
together.
stand behind him and look at him throw and
Yeah.
say, I imagine, hey, this is what Patrick does. This is exactly what you should try to do. And I'm sure there's a lot of that physical type of teaching and learning going on when you're trying to make substantial changes to a guy's mechanics. Before I let the other part go, I'm willing, Mark, to say that Kyle Shanahan perhaps is not the one that's, at the biggest end of the culpability, line for Trey Lance not developing. But Kyle Shannon is also the one that hires the quarterback coaches, which are the ones that are supposed to help a guy develop. So when I'm looking at Rich Scangarello in 2021, the quarterback's coach, who was also there in 2017 and 2018 and had primarily worked with Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm looking at him and I'm wondering what went wrong. I'm also wondering why Kyle Shanahan this past season, when you need to ideally develop a new, fresh, young quarterback, why your selection for your quarterback's coach is a guy who has no experience in Brian Griese. Now, Brian Griese did, I think, a really good job at handling some of the the professional aspects of being a quarterback, how to deal with the media, how to carry yourself, how to, I don't know, just be a quarterback in the National Football League. But in terms of development, uh, he doesn't exactly have a big background in that area. And clearly there wasn't a lot of gains made by Trey Lance, even prior to his point of getting hurt. So while Kyle Shanahan, yes, might not be involved with teaching Trey Lance a 5-step drop or a 3-step drop or how to complete a short pass at a requisite percentage, he's also the guy that puts the people in position that are supposed to be doing that, and they clearly haven't.
Yeah, that's fair. Just to go a little bit more, I guess, in depth of what I was talking about earlier, I think there really is something to be said for all of the stops and starts that Trey Lance has had to deal with in his short career. He broke his right index finger in the 49ers preseason finale in 2021. That was his rookie year. And you go into that season not expecting to play a ton, of course, but remember he got that spot start early in the year in Arizona where it seemed like Kyle Shanahan was just running him into the ground, and he suffered another minor injury there with a broken right index finger that we talked about maybe a month ago, that never really fully healed or didn't heal correctly. And now is the time where it's finally back to normal and he can grip a football like normal again. These sorts of things that have impacted every step of his career. And it's not even to mention the season ending terrible broken ankle, which doesn't necessarily affect the throwing motion, just the arm itself, but obviously has a big impact on the work you're able to do. And if you're able to see any improvement in his ball and the way it comes out of his hands when he's fully striding and all of that, there's been so much going on around Trey Lance that has, through no fault of his own, just limited his ability to see if there's been progress. We haven't really had that chance until now, when Trey Lance has said, Kyle Shanahan has said about Trey Lance since they started their offseason program, last month, he's had no soreness. He hasn't had the arm fatigue. He's been able to, use his feet and set up his base and get a much stronger, better base, deliver the ball better. There was the big story when he was working out with Patrick Mahomes that he's throwing tighter spirals now. Now, we'll really have a better look at it in OTAs coming up this week. But I do think we're finally at a point now in Trey Lance's career where he seems fully healthy. And now is when we can see if the 49ers, if everyone that Trey Lance is working with has done all the requisite steps to get him at the spot where they want him to be. Because I think at this point, there's no more room for excuses, if you want to call them that. I could see, some of those excuses in past years because just simply of injuries, but there's no room for that anymore.
Well, it doesn't necessarily sound like you believe he's going to get a chance to prove if those requisite steps are taken. So
I don't know.
We only have to judge what we've seen so far, which is the fact that he's not ready.
Yep.
And that really is the bottom line for me. I'm glad that Trey Lance has made strides. I'm sure he's a better version of himself. He's obviously 100%. But Kyle Shanahan, I hate to break it to fans or to you or to whoever is listening out there, Mark. If Trey Lance doesn't turn out to get an opportunity or doesn't turn out to play and he just kind of goes by the wayside, whether that's a coaching decision or not, I am going to look at that as a developmental failure because they have not been able to get anything at this point worth much out of the number 3 overall pick. That's simply a fact.
No, 100% a fact. And the outcomes are either Trey Lance simply isn't good or you misdiagnosed him and he is good, but you don't believe in him. Either way, you share a gigantic portion of the blame because in the first option where he's simply not good, guess what? You picked, identified, failed to develop the guy. And then in the second option, maybe even worse, you potentially picked the right guy, but gave up on him too early. So either way that this turns out for the 49ers in those two outcomes, there is an outcome where they give him a chance and he plays well. But in those two outcomes, which seem to be the heavy favorites, a lot of blame, on the 49ers feet for sure.